My name is Angelina Keptya, and I'm the host of today's topic, Principles for Raising Children for the Lord. Today, I am joined by Sister Lorri Johnson. Miss Lorri, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to have you. As you know, I recently became a mom 5 weeks ago, and I am very eager to discuss this topic with you. May you share how many children you have and how long you've been a mother?
Well, first of all, congratulations on being a mom. It's a great blessing. And as you are experiencing probably the most life-changing thing you'll go through.
Yes.
We did have 4 children naturally. We have 1 baby in heaven. But God blessed our family with 4 children in 5 years, a son and then 3 daughters. And so I have been where you are and survived. How about that?
Yes. Well, I wouldn't doubt that you have a lot to say on this topic. Myself and the audience, future moms, young moms watching, are probably very excited to see what you have to share today.
Well, it's a great honor and a privilege to be here. And actually, I'm here because God has commanded me to do this. In Titus 2, verses 3 through 5, God speaks to both the young women and to the older women. And he tells the older women that we are to be examples for the younger women and that we are to teach you. And then God goes through, I love it because he tells us exactly the things that we're supposed to teach you. And one of those things that God has commanded us to teach is how to love your children. And, you know, it's amazing that God always knows what he's doing. And he can take the older women, what I would call maybe the veteran women, the women who've been in some battles. They've had some skirmishes. But he can take the older women and he can come alongside the younger women, the new recruits, and we can be a help to you. We are a little further down the road than what you are, and none of us are perfect parents. But we have a perfect God who's given us his perfect will to help us as we train children. I don't have a PhD in parenting. I'm no parenting expert. I have made a lot of mistakes, and my children were not perfect, and they still are not perfect because they had imperfect parents. And no one begins being a mom and no one ends being a mother knowing everything and doing it perfectly. You know, we can read books about parenting, and you might have done that before you had your little one, and they give you instructions, things to do. But reading about parenting and actually being a parent are 2 different things. It's kind of like babysitting and having your own child. 2 totally different experiences. Okay? And you know, the parenting ideals that we have and the thoughts that we think we're going to bring into our family, unfortunately, they're met with great resistance from our child and our own sinful nature. Sometimes we just don't follow through and do the things that we should do. And I just want to be very honest, very open with you as we talk about this. I believe that outside of my personal Bible time, nothing has stretched me, grown me, challenged me more than being a mom and being responsible for the souls that God has entrusted to me. Loving our children should come naturally, but sometimes our maternal love can get out of bounds and can be misused, actually.
Could you elaborate in what ways can a mother's love be distorted or misused?
Sure. Because we love our children so much, we can have a tendency to be too lenient with them. Oh, I just love them so much, I can't discipline them. Well, God has a lot to say to us about disciplining and training our children. The opposite side of that can be, too, sometimes a mom can love her children so much that she's too restrictive. She's always hovering over them. She never allows them to experience anything, to go anywhere, to be with anyone else but her. Sometimes that's called helicopter parenting. It's a term you might have heard of. And so both of those things are not beneficial to our children. Talking to women about their children, I can tell you this, over the years that I've been a mom and received instruction, and now as an older woman giving instruction, when you start to talk to a woman about her kids, boy, it just seems like it wants to raise the hair on the back of her neck. That mother bear instinct comes out like, don't talk to me about my child. But my prayer is that we will look at God's word, we'll look at some principles, some teaching that God has given to us, And we'll see how to apply that into our everyday parenting and training our children for the Lord. And I really believe that raising children for God is the greatest ministry, one of the greatest ministries we can have.
Yeah. Well, as we look into God's Word, I am thankful to be able to hear from you as a mother who is older and has more experience than myself about some of these important biblical principles. Well, where do we begin on such an important topic?
Well, you know, there are things about parenting all over the Bible. And one of the things that I'm so thankful for is that God gave us examples, first of all, of parents in the Bible. Now, just think about people in the Bible, but think about them as parents and the examples or the things that we can learn from them. Think about Adam and Eve, first parents, right? Started in a perfect environment. And yet the very first family had a murder. They had one of their sons kill another son. Then think about Isaac and Rebekah. A beautiful love story, but yet a story that turned into favoritism in a family, where the father favored one child and the mother favored another child. And that favoritism, that idea of favoritism, even continued in Jacob's life, where he had a favorite wife, he had a favorite son, and that didn't help the family. It destroys the family. I think about Job and his wife. You know, here's a husband and wife that suffered greatly. We know that the Bible tells us in one day, Job lost all of his possessions. In one day, Job lost all of his children. And then Job lost his health. And when his wife comes, and the only time we see her speaking in there, I know what she said was not good. The advice that she gave was not biblical. But I have to think of her as a woman who has gone through all of these things too. And yet her husband, he faithfully led her. He spoke words of truth to her. He says, after he receives all this news, it says, then Job arose and rent his mantle, shaved his head, and fell down upon the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And then it says in Job 1:20 through 22, in everything that Job went through, Job didn't sin or charge God foolishly. So Job and his wife are an example to us. I think about Samson's parents, Manoah and his wife, a couple that couldn't have a child, and an angel comes and tells them, you're going to have a son. And it's interesting, Manoah says in Judges 13:8, he's asked the angel, teach us what we shall do unto the child that shall be born. He's asking for instruction. Give us wisdom, give us direction. Another family as parents is King David and Bathsheba. Now maybe we've never thought about them in their parenting role, but here's a relationship started in adultery. Their firstborn son died, and yet from this union came Solomon, the wisest man that ever lived apart from Jesus Christ. When we get to the New Testament, we see examples of parents in Zacharias and Elizabeth, a godly couple serving God, and yet they couldn't have a child. But God blessed that couple with John the Baptist. And it says of John the Baptist, Jesus said this in Matthew 11:11, verily I say unto you, among them that are born of women, there hath not risen a greater than John the Baptist. His parents, Zacharias and Elizabeth. Mary and Joseph, of course, were parents. They were the only ones that ever had a perfect child. But they went on to have other children as well. I've often thought, can you imagine having Jesus as your big brother? I mean, he never did anything wrong. It was never his fault. But his siblings, they had sinful natures. And then we read about Eunice and Lois in the New Testament as well, a mother and a grandmother of Timothy, and the godly influence that they had on their lives. But we don't read anything about their husbands. And I've often wondered, where were the men in this scenario? Where was their input? Perhaps it was missing, and sometimes it can still be missing today in our parenting. So I'm thankful for the examples that God gives us of parents, and we can learn from them. We can look at them and learn from them. We can look at what they did well, and we can follow that example. And we can look at what they did wrong, and we can avoid that in our families. God also gives us a lot of verses on parenting in the Bible. I started to list them all out, and it was like pages and pages of verses. But I want to give us just this important one from Exodus 20, verse 12. One of the first commandments that God gave, one of the 10 commandments, honor thy father and thy mother. And this is a commandment that came with a promise that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth to thee.
Well, I'm also very thankful for all these examples and the Bible of parents that we can refer back to and learn from. How do we take all these Bible examples of parents and spiritual instructions and apply them in our everyday parenting?
Well, I think that's where the trouble can come sometimes. We have all these verses, we have all these examples. Now, how do I put it into everyday parenting in my home and in your home? Well, as I was getting ready to prepare this lesson, I sought counsel from other women as well. I sought counsel first of all, from women that I knew. It's one thing to say things online, and it's another thing for you to actually observe them in their life. And so I went to women that I had observed over the years that really strove to raise their children for God. And I looked at their children. I looked at what kind of children came out of those homes. And I asked them this question: what made the spiritual difference in your home? And it's interesting, I asked not only the ladies that, I asked the kids that too. What made the spiritual difference in your home? And so I got lots of different things. But you know, as I started getting all this information together, I started seeing the same principles from different families, maybe stated in different ways, but the same principles given over and over again. And so that's what I've taken into this lesson and into our next lesson, is to try to take godly principles and put them into practical parenting. So here's the first principle. Number one, we need to remember our priorities and we need to keep them in order. And I like to remember them like the fingers on my hand. The number one priority that we have as a woman is our relationship with God. And then if we get married, the second human priority that we have is our relationship with our husband. Well, that's number two. Number three, if God blesses us with children, then we have a responsibility to our children. We have a home that we need to function in within a family, and anything else is like that thumb out there. It's stuck out to the side. And these really are our 5 priorities, and this is the order that we need to keep them in. Remember what God said in Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 7. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. Verse 5 says, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thine soul, and with all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in the way, when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. So the first priority that we have in our lives as women, and as women that want to raise our children for God, is our relationship with God. Number one, we cannot put into our children's lives something that's not in our lives. Deuteronomy says, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart. It has to be in our hearts first. And not only in our hearts, but it has to be lived out in our actions and lived out in our home. God's truth and our heart to obey them will be demonstrated in many different ways in our everyday living. What we talk about, who we talk about, how we talk about, how we treat others, all of those things are a demonstration of our heart for God and His principles in our life. And we have to depend upon the wisdom of God when it comes to raising these children for Him. To keep God first in our life, we need to be in His Word. Because biblically serving our families and caring for our homes and instructing our children in the ways of God, we don't just naturally know how to do that. But God has put all of those things in His Word for us. He's told us what we need to know. And we cannot hope to get it right when it comes to raising our children for God. God has given us examples. God has given us instructions. And that's what we need to follow.
Our first priority in raising children for the Lord is our relationship with God.
Absolutely, number one. But that second priority in raising children for God is in our relationship with our husband. This is really huge. A huge part of successfully raising our children is our relationship with our husband. That's the first human relationship that they observe. And many times mistakes can be made when we put our children over our husband in our home. Someone explained it to me this way years ago. Our children come into our home and eventually they will leave our home. But the husband-wife relationship remains. And we don't want to allow that relationship, that priority relationship, the first relationship that God created in the garden was a husband and wife. We don't want to allow that husband and wife relationship to deteriorate, to be neglected while we're busy raising children or taking care of our home or taking care of others. Much of the security of our children comes from the husband-wife relationship. If mom and dad are doing okay, that little child's heart is secure. But if mom and dad are struggling, that transfers right into our children as well. You see, we are a team when it comes to raising our children. It's not you're the dad, you go make the money, and I'm the mom, and I'll take care of raising the children. God has given those children to us together to raise. And so that husband is so, so important.
Yes, so our first priority is God, and our second priority is our husbands.
Yes. Well, if you remember, God, husband, and then children. Now we're to the kids, right? Yes. Children are precious gifts from God. They are eternal souls that God entrusts to our care. Well, that's a heavy responsibility. Even more so above just keeping them alive every day, yes. Keeping them fed and keeping them clean. And many, many mistakes in raising children for God and for His glory come in making the child the center of the family. Now you might say, well, what does that look like? What do you mean by that? Well, we start to operate and we start to ask little questions like this. Well, what does little Ivan want to do? Where does little Ivan want to sit? What does little Ivan want to have for supper? And do you see how the child now is becoming the center of all of our decisions? Yeah. When everything starts to revolve around our children, maybe it's little Ivan or little Angelina or whoever her name is, okay? When all of those decisions start to revolve around them, that just encourages their self-will. You see, they're already born thinking that they rule the world and they rule us. And we have to take care of correcting that and training that. Making the child the center of our home, this is called child-centered parenting. And this is the way that the world parents their children, but this is not the way that God wants us to parent our children for Him.
Our priorities for raising children for the Lord, God, our husband,
Good.
Children, and then what?
Then our home. Our home is going to be our primary classroom. That's where we're going to spend most of our time. And God said to us in that Deuteronomy passage, He says, thou shalt teach them diligently. And He says, when we walk by the way, when we go to bed, when we get up. And so much of our training takes place at home. An old author said this. Now, this was written back in the 1800s, 1888. But listen to this. I thought it was really good. You may take your children to church. You may send them to the best of schools and give them Bibles and fill their heads with knowledge. But if in all this time there is no regular training at home, I fear it will go hard in the end with your children's souls. We have a huge responsibility, and the majority of our training, our teaching is going to take place at home, into their little lives. I always like to say the results of our parenting will be seen in public, and so will the results of our lack of parenting. If we take care of things at home, discipline, attitudes, all of those things, those are going to be visible. But if we don't, that's going to be visible as well. Home is the place where the foundations of character are laid. The things that we teach our children how to love, how to respect, how to have self-control. They don't come with any self-control. All of that has to be trained into them. How to share. A sibling is really good for this because they have to share things with a sibling. How to obey. All of these character traits have to be trained into our children. And they have to be put into their hearts. They're not there naturally. Home is the place also where our habits are formed. So do we want our children to be dependable, hard workers? Well, where does that start? That starts at home. We teach them how to be dependable and hard workers at home. I was sharing this one time, and a mom says, well, how do I teach my children to be a good worker? I said, by working them, by giving them chores, by giving them responsibilities. Yeah. Work doesn't come naturally. We are naturally what? Lazy. That's right. We have to overcome being lazy. And I really believe one of the greatest gifts, one of the lifelong skills that we can give to our kids is teaching them how to work. How to work independently. How to work unsupervised. You know, it's one thing to work when mom is standing over you. It's another thing to work when we remove our presence. Can they continue to work without our presence there? How for them to work thoroughly and to the end, to completion. We are the managers of our home. God calls it in Titus chapter 2, we are the keepers at home. So we're the managers. We're overseeing all of this. And this training is going to take place in our home.
So our priorities in raising children for the Lord are God, husband, children, home, and is there anything else?
Well, that's what I like to call the others. That's the thumb that sticks out on the other side of the hand. What happens many times is we can allow others to take precedence over these other 4 areas. Because honestly, it's easier to do things sometimes for others or to be out with others than to be at home and doing the work and training that I need to do there. It's easier to think of others, to think of them and their needs. I had a dear friend, and she had children that were the same age as mine. And I tell you what, she got so much done. She was always taking meals to everybody. She was doing, but you know what? There was cereal for her kids at home. She would take a really nice meal to someone maybe that just had a baby, and then they would come home and have cereal at her house. And I just shared with her one time, I said, what if you thought about serving your family first before running around and serving everyone else? You see, God has given us one family, and that's our priority. And so others, that will come more, especially with the ages of our children as they get a little bigger. But if we want to dedicate ourselves to raising children for the Lord, I really believe the first principle, God, our husband, our children, our home, and anything else.
Well, we've covered quite a lot for our first principle for raising children for the Lord. Please join us for our second session where we will cover more principles on this topic.